People usually think Love in America looks like a rom-com. Red roses, soft background music, and a restaurant where you pretend not to look at the bill until you get home and panic. That's the safe version, the version your parents like, and the version your credit card definitely appreciates. But in real life, some Americans look at all that and go, yeah, that's nice. But it's not crazy enough to be real love. For them, loving someone isn't just about sweet words. It's about doing something so weird your friends will tell the story for the next 10 years. So reckless that even you're not sure whether you're being incredibly romantic or just made the worst decision of your life. The 31 stories you're about to hear are all real. Not movies, not made up. Just very normal Americans who on one particular day decided to love in a very not normal way. And of course, we're starting in Florida. Story 1, a dolphin delivered the engagement ring. The main character here is a marine biologist in Florida. He worked with dolphins every day, talked to them so much that his coworkers suspected he was more comfortable with dolphins than with actual humans. Honestly, after a few bad dates, that's not a hard place to end up. Instead of getting down on one knee like a normal person, he trained a dolphin to swim up carrying a seashell. Inside the shell was a ring. The plan sounded incredibly romantic, except for one tiny detail. Dolphins do not understand the concept of a life-changing moment, nor do they accept responsibility if they drop expensive jewelry. During the show, the dolphin swam over and handed the shell to the woman. She smiled, assuming it was just another cute routine. Then she opened the shell, and her brain needed a few seconds to catch up with reality. This might be the only moment in human history where someone genuinely had to think, did I just get proposed to by a dolphin? She laughed, said yes, and the dolphin squeaked like it was celebrating too. Story 2. Hacking an LED billboard to propose a crowded city. Endless traffic. Massive LED billboards flashing like they always do. Nobody stuck in that line of cars had any idea they were about to become accidental witnesses to a proposal. Our main character is a coder. The type who's comfortable working in the shadows, drinks cold coffee on purpose, and genuinely believes every life problem can be solved with cables and code. For weeks, he planned this quietly, hooking a billboard up to a tiny computer no one paid attention to. Then, right at rush hour, the message appeared above the traffic. Will you marry me? Cars slowed down. A few horns went off. Someone almost slammed the brakes just to finish reading the sentence. His girlfriend froze for a few seconds before realizing she was the main character here. She turned around and saw him standing there, shaking harder than a weak Wi-Fi signal. She said yes, right before anyone could ask, wait, is this even legal? Story 3, drawing a GPS heart in the sky with an airplane. The main character this time is a pilot stuck under a pile of travel restrictions. He was still allowed to fly, but every flight had to have a clear purpose. And he decided that love was a perfectly valid reason. Instead of flying straight from point A to point B like a normal human, he submitted a flight path so weird his coworkers thought he had dropped his map mid-planning. Up in the air, the plane slowly traced out a heart shape, something you could only see if you opened a flight tracking app. Not long after, the flight data showed up online. Strangers took screenshots, shared them, and wondered who had enough free time to just fly around in circles like that. Meanwhile, his girlfriend was standing on her balcony, scrolling her phone out of boredom. When she saw the heart shape, it clicked instantly. She knew exactly one person with the time, access, and emotional commitment to pull this off. He did not need to land to propose. The heart in the sky already said everything. Story 4. Skydiving proposal and dropping the ring. The main character is the thrill-seeker type. The kind of guy who sees danger and thinks, wow, romantic. So naturally, he decided to propose in a way that would make an insurance company immediately raise its rates. He chose to skydive from thousands of feet in the air. Strong winds, heart racing, everything went according to plan right up until the moment he pulled out the ring. In a split second, it slipped from his fingers and vanished into the sky, like the atmosphere itself had opted out of this proposal. The panic hit instantly, free-falling while mentally processing a very obvious bad decision. After landing, he launched the strangest search mission imaginable, combing the area with a level of hope that was doing a lot of heavy lifting. 3 days later, the ring was found inside a piece of fruit on a nearby farm. And somehow, against all logic, she still said yes. Story 5. Drones forming a ring in the sky. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood where the hottest news is usually someone putting the trash out on the wrong day. So when hundreds of drones suddenly took off at the same time, the entire block stepped outside with the exact same thought. This has to be some kind of new tech test. The drones flew in serious formation, climbed higher, then slowly shaped themselves into a massive ring in the sky. Phones came out instantly. People started guessing whether this was an advertisement or a trial run for some future show. Only one person stood completely frozen. The woman looked up at the sky, then around at the crowd, and slowly realized this message was not for the neighborhood. It was meant just for her. When he stepped forward, hands shaking, she laughed before she could even say a word. She nodded yes, and the entire block applauded like they had accidentally attended an outdoor wedding without an invitation. Story 6. 500 rolls of toilet paper. During the shortage. This happened during the Great Toilet Paper Shortage in America, a time when people talked about bathroom supplies with the seriousness usually reserved for natural disasters. Our main character stared at the empty store shelves and had a thought: if love is a long-term commitment, then toilet paper definitely is too. So he started stockpiling, one pack at a time. Every successful purchase felt like winning a small survival game. The rolls ended up everywhere in his trunk, under the bed, inside closets, and in places even he forgot about. Once he reached 500 rolls, he arranged all of them into a giant heart on his front lawn. Neighbors came outside laughing politely, asking if maybe they could borrow a roll or two. Then his girlfriend appeared and froze for a few seconds. The ring was not in his hand. It was hidden inside the softest roll of all. She laughed, said yes, and everyone agreed that sometimes love really is softer than everything else. Story 7. Training an alligator to nod. Yes. Say yes. Absolutely. This story takes place in a southern swamp where mosquitoes are the size of small birds and everything has teeth. The main character is a tour guide who spends his days taking people out on boats and calmly reassuring them that the alligators are pretty friendly as long as you respect the distance. Over the years on the job, he trained one alligator to respond to a few simple commands. It knew when to stay still, when to lift its head, and most importantly, when not to make people panic more than necessary. When he took his girlfriend on a private sunset tour, other visitors watched from a safe distance with very stressed faces. At the big moment, he gave the signal and the alligator slowly, very seriously nodded its head. The tourists held their breath. The girlfriend could not stop laughing. She said yes, and somehow an alligator became the accidental witness to a lifelong promise. Story 8. Bees writing a proposal in honey. The main character is a beekeeper, the kind of person who is extremely patient and has a very special trust-based relationship with thousands of flying creatures that can also sting. When it came time to propose, he decided to do it in a way only a beekeeper would ever think of. He designed special honeycomb frames, arranging them so that as the bees built their combs and filled them with honey, they would naturally form complete letters. The plan sounded simple, but required the exact thing love also demands: time and waiting. For weeks, he could only watch. No rushing, no interfering, just letting the bees work at their own pace. On the day of the reveal, he opened the hive in front of his girlfriend. As the honeycomb was exposed, the message, "Be my bride," shimmered in the sunlight. She laughed out loud, said yes, and everyone agreed this might be the sweetest proposal in the most literal sense possible. Story 9. A barista memorized hundreds of coffee orders to propose. This all took place in a familiar coffee shop where regulars do not need menus, and the barista basically knows your life story based on how much caffeine you consume. The main character is a morning shift barista. With a slightly terrifying skill, he can remember hundreds of different coffee orders without writing anything down. For months, he printed tiny lines of text on individual cups. Each line was a memory only the two of them understood. Quick meetups, inside jokes, exhausting days, all wrapped around a hot cup of coffee. One morning, she picked up her cup and started reading. When she reached the final line, she stopped, looked up, and time slowed down for a few seconds. Coffee spilled onto the floor. Nearby customers froze. And he was already down on one knee. She laughed, said yes, and the entire cafe silently agreed that caffeine could wait just a little longer. Story 10. Proposing on the weather forecast. It started as a completely normal morning weather segment. The presenter stood in front of the green screen talking about sunshine, rain, and numbers most people only half listen to while making coffee. Then viewers began to sense something was off. The temperatures for the week looked strange, not because they were hot or cold, but because they made absolutely no sense meteorologically. Social media got confused fast. People asked if this was a technical glitch or some kind of inside joke. Only one person was staring at the screen without blinking. His girlfriend recognized the numbers instantly as they lined up into a very familiar message. And right on cue, the weather presenter smiled just a little longer than usual. She opened her phone and sent her answer immediately through the station app. No further forecast needed because it was already very clear this was a beautiful day. Story 11. A DJ rapped a proposal live on the radio. It was a late-night shift, the time slot usually reserved for long-haul drivers and insomniacs, and people quietly wondering why they are still awake. The main character is a local DJ more comfortable talking into a microphone than having serious emotional conversations. That night, instead of playing music like usual, he started rapping. The rap included his girlfriend's name, repeated so clearly no listener could pretend they misheard it. The studio phones immediately lit up. Callers wanted to know if this was a new segment or if the DJ had just gone through a breakup. Meanwhile, his girlfriend was listening in bed at home, at first just laughing along. Then it hit her every line was one of their shared memories. When he stopped the music and asked the big question, she called straight into the studio and answered on air. Radio is terrible at keeping secrets, but the proposal broadcast went through loud and clear. Story 12. Adopting a grumpy old cat just to sign the paperwork. The real main character in this story is a grumpy old cat. The kind of cat that has lived long enough to be completely over humans. It hates change, hates being held, and especially hates any form of affection that was not scheduled in advance. The woman's boyfriend knew this very well, especially every time they took the cat to the vet. The problem was that to sign the consent forms for treatment, he needed to be the cat's legal family member. So he decided that adopting the cat was probably the most serious way to prove commitment. The paperwork was handled with surprising formality, complete with signatures files and the cat's deeply judgmental stare. When he explained why he was doing this, the woman burst out laughing, realizing she had just been proposed to through veterinary administration. She said yes. The cat let out an annoyed huff, and from that day on, it officially became part of the family without ever being consulted. Story 13. A jazz parade proposal. This story takes place on the streets of New Orleans, where music is basically part of the air. People might not know what day of the week it is, but they will absolutely hear a trumpet somewhere nearby. The main character is a jazz musician who understands one simple truth about this city. If you want to say something important, you should probably say it with music. So he gathered his friends, each one holding an instrument and a very specific assignment. When the parade started, the music came alive, loud, joyful, impossible to ignore. Then one by one on cue, each musician stopped and shouted a single word. At first, the crowd just laughed and filmed, thinking this was normal New Orleans behavior. But when the words came together into a very familiar sentence, everyone joined in like they had rehearsed. The woman stood there in the middle of the street, laughing, shaking her head, and then nodding yes. And just like that, the entire neighborhood celebrated, even though none of them had been invited in advance. Story 14. Comic-Con and 50 illustrated love chapters.
Oh my gosh, yes!
Comic-Con is always packed the kind of place where you can see a superhero waiting in line for a hot dog and a wizard asking for directions to the bathroom. Right in the middle of that chaos, the main character decided this was the perfect setting to tell his love story. He hired 50 artists to illustrate their relationship as comic book covers. From their first meeting to awkward early dates to small arguments reimagined as epic superhero battles. People walking by stopped to look, assuming this was just an extremely committed fan art project. The final frame at the end of the hall was completely blank. When the woman reached it, he handed her a pen and said the story needed an official ending. She signed her name, nodded yes, and the surrounding fandom applauded like they had just witnessed a perfectly canon ending. Story 15. Floating buoys that almost looked like an SOS.
Yes.
This story starts offshore, where fishermen are more familiar with rough waves than romantic gestures. The main character is a fisherman who figured if the sea had been part of his whole life, then it might as well help with the proposal too. He and his friends arranged hundreds of floating buoys on the water, spelling out a massive message that only made sense from above. The problem was that from a distance, the shape looked a lot like a distress signal. It did not take long for authorities to notice. The mood shifted fast. Patrol boats moved closer and everyone prepared to do a lot of explaining. Once the truth came out, the tension instantly turned into laughter. Instead of warning sirens, congratulatory horns echoed across the water. She said yes, and the sea that day stayed calm like it had been holding its breath the whole time. Story 16. A corn maze shaped like her face. This story takes place in the middle of a massive cornfield where from ground level nothing looks special at all, just an overwhelming amount of corn. The main character is a high-tech farmer who believes that if love is big enough, it deserves to take over an entire field. He designed the maze using GPS with so much precision that only from the air does the full image appear, her face complete with a familiar smile. Of course she had no idea. She entered the maze thinking it was just a fun walk, turning left, turning right, occasionally wondering why certain paths felt strangely familiar. Then at one turn it hit her. The corn walls around her were forming lines she recognized. When she reached the center of the maze, he was already there waiting. And this time, no one wanted to get lost again. Story 17. A flash mob in the shopping mall. It all started like a completely normal shopping day. People pushing carts, trying on shoes, standing in front of food courts, asking themselves if they really needed to buy one more thing. Then suddenly music started playing. At first it was just a familiar song, a little louder than usual. Then one person began to dance. Then another. And before anyone could fully process what was happening, the entire mall turned into a shared dance floor. The crowd joined in naturally like they had been waiting for this moment all along. The woman at the center first just watched, laughed, and filmed everything. Then a hand pulled her into the circle and she was swept up by the rhythm. On the final beat, everyone stopped at once. He stepped out of the crowd, got down on one knee, and the ring appeared exactly as the music cut off. No one remembered what they came to buy anymore. Story 18. A baseball scoreboard encoding a proposal. The baseball game itself was completely normal. Fans ate hot dogs, argued with the umpire, and pretended to fully understand all the statistics flashing across the massive electronic scoreboard. Then the numbers started to look a little strange. Not illegal, not a technical glitch, just a sequence appearing at the right time in the right order. Most people shrugged and kept watching. But for one person, they meant something else entirely. He had quietly arranged for the numbers to encode a message only the two of them understood. The day they first met, a favorite jersey number and one number only she would recognize. She stared at the scoreboard, frowned, then her eyes widened as everything clicked into place. She turned to him and saw the smile he could not hide. Before the game ended, she nodded yes. That night the team might not have won big, but love definitely won the game. Story 19. A pumpkin festival with hundreds of carved memories. That year's pumpkin festival looked just like it always did, filled with the smell of baked goods, kids running around, and pumpkins lining a long path glowing under warm lights. Everyone assumed it was just another carefully planned decoration. But if you looked closely, every single pumpkin was carved with a small image. Each one represented a memory, the first meeting, a long trip, an inside joke only two people understood. Visitors walked along smiling, thinking this was simply a love story being told to the crowd. The woman slowed down as the details started to feel familiar. The farther she walked, the faster her heart beat. At the final pumpkin, she bent down and saw that inside was not a candle, but a ring. She laughed and birds scattered from a nearby fence at the sound. That festival gained one more memory no pumpkin could fully capture. Story 20. Proposing in the calm eye of a tornado. The main character is a storm chaser, the kind of person whose heart races with excitement when warning sirens go off. To him, standing near a tornado is not a bad idea, it just requires very careful planning. That day they were sitting in their car tracking the storm as it moved closer. The wind screamed, rain slammed against the windows, and then suddenly everything went quiet. A strange stillness settled in, like the world had hit pause. He turned to her and said one very short sentence, because this was obviously not the moment for a long speech. No flowers, no music, just the most important question spoken into the unsettling silence. She looked at him, laughed at how completely absurd the situation was, and nodded, yes. Immediately after he started the engine and they sped off to find safety. Later she said that if you can get proposed to in the middle of a tornado, then living with a little chaos does not sound that scary at all. Story 21. The Northern Lights and a long exposure photo. This story takes place on an extremely cold night, the kind of cold that makes you question every life choice that led you there. The main character is a photographer obsessed with chasing the Northern Lights who believes that if love is big enough, it is worth freezing for. They stood under a dark sky as green and purple lights began to twist above them like someone was drawing with a giant neon pen. He set up the camera dialed in a long exposure and told her to stand still and not ask too many questions. After a few shots, they retreated to the car to warm up and check the photos on the small screen. At first, it was just the usual glowing ribbons. Then, on one image, she squinted. In the soft blur of light, the streaks formed a very clear message. She turned to him smiling through clouds of white breath. No long conversation needed, she nodded yes. That night, nature itself officially became the witness to a lifelong promise. Story 22, Walking Through Snow to Write a Message. This story begins with a long walk across snow, the kind of walk where every single step makes you seriously reconsider all your life choices. The main character is bundled in thermal gear, carrying a GPS and following a plan that, if explained out loud, would absolutely have been met with concern. He walked for hours, leaving footprints in thick white snow. The farther he went, the heavier his legs felt, the harder it became to breathe, and at some point his brain started asking whether love really needed this much cardio. By the time he finished the final stretch, he barely had the energy to speak. He handed his girlfriend the drone controller and told her to look at the screen. From above, the footprints came together into a very clear message. She laughed, forgot about the cold, and nodded yes. From that moment on, the snow stayed cold, but love did not. Story 23, LED Lights, Beneath a Frozen Lake. This story takes place on a perfectly clear frozen lake where looking down means staring straight into dark water below. It was so cold that even the wind sounded like it was complaining. The main character, however, believed this was the perfect setting for a proposal as long as everyone wore enough layers. He secretly placed waterproof LED light strips beneath the thick ice, carefully calculating their positions. From the surface, there was nothing to see but snow and ice. But once night fully fell, the lights switched on from below, turning the entire lake into a glowing sheet of glass. His girlfriend stood there shivering from the cold, then suddenly froze for a different reason, as bright letters slowly appeared beneath her feet. The wind was still brutal, but she could not stop laughing as she read the message. She nodded yes, and both of them realized that sometimes the warmest moments come from the coldest places. Story 24, Proposing Near Hawaiian Lava. This story takes place in Hawaii near an active volcanic area that was technically still within the safe zone, a fact the tour guide stressed at least 5 separate times. The main character believed nothing says intense love quite like flowing lava as long as you stand far enough away. Heat radiated constantly strong enough to make everyone sweat, even with ocean winds blowing through. As night fell, the lava began to glow, lighting up the area in deep orange-red like something out of a science fiction movie. The woman stood quietly, taking it all in, trying to decide which parts were breathtaking natural beauty and which parts were signs she should maybe take a few steps back. Right then, he dropped to one knee and asked the most important question of his life. The moment she said yes, the volcano in the distance released a soft plume of smoke like nature itself was nodding in approval. Story 25, A Wingsuit Carrying a Love Message. Everything started with an extremely tense preparation session. The main character put on his wingsuit, checked the harness, checked the backup parachute, and then checked everything again, because this is the kind of proposal where even a tiny mistake turns into a documentary. He climbed up a cliff near the campsite where his girlfriend was staying with friends. While everyone else was busy setting up tents and making coffee, he jumped off the edge and dropped into open air. As he flew across the sky above the campsite, the large message printed across the wingsuit became impossible to miss. His girlfriend looked up, followed the flying figure, and then screamed, half terrified, half laughing when she recognized the familiar words. Seconds later, he deployed the parachute and landed safely. She ran over, wrapped him in a hug, and nodded, yes. Everyone around them agreed this love story really did take things to a higher level. Story 26, A Math Proof for Marriage. This story takes place in a college classroom where students mentally prepare for long lectures and an unreasonable amount of confusing formulas. The main character is a math professor who believes that if love is logical, then it can absolutely be proven. That day's lecture started like any other. He filled the board with long equations, dense symbols, and steps that forced students to take notes, even if they were not fully sure what they understood. His girlfriend sat in the class, assuming this was just another academic exercise. Slowly, the reasoning built toward a final conclusion. On the very last line, instead of a mathematical symbol, there appeared a clear sentence, "Therefore, we should get married." The room went silent for a few seconds. Then he opened a ring box. She laughed, nodded yes, and the entire class applauded like they had just witnessed the most important theorem of their lives. Story 27. A retro game. Press Y for yes. This story begins with an old computer, the kind that sounds like it is struggling to remember its youth every time it boots up. The main character is a retro gaming enthusiast who believes the most important things in life do not need high-end graphics or an internet connection. He personally coded a simple game. Blocky characters, basic colors, and familiar beep sounds straight out of the 1990s. His girlfriend sat down to play just to kill time, assuming it was a cute, nostalgic distraction. She worked through each level, jumping over obstacles, collecting points, and slowly taking it a little more seriously than intended. At the final level, the game stopped. On the screen appeared a very short question: "Will you marry me?" No dramatic music, no special effects. Just two choices: press Y for yes. She looked at him, smiled, and pressed the Y key. No internet required. The game still delivered a perfect ending. Story 28. Hiding a ring in a brewing barrel. The main character is a craft beer enthusiast, the kind of person who truly believes the best things in life need time to ferment. He decided love should follow the same rule. He prepared a special batch of beer with extra care, then secretly placed a tiny titanium capsule containing a ring into the fermentation barrel. From that moment, the long waiting period began, where every day he had to casually answer the same question: "So when can we drink it?" When tasting day finally arrived, friends gathered, raised their glasses, and offered very professional-sounding opinions. When it was his girlfriend's turn, his hands shook more than they did during his first ever brew. Then there was a small clink inside her glass. The capsule floated up through the foam. The room went quiet for a few seconds. She opened it, saw the ring, laughed, and nodded yes. That batch of beer was declared perfectly aged. The love was too. Story 29. Training a parrot to say yes. The real main character of this story is an extremely loud parrot, the kind of loud that makes the neighbors more aware of its daily routine than the actual owner. And of course, when given an important mission, it did not stay quiet about it. He started training the parrot to say two simple words: "Say yes." It sounded easy, but the parrot preferred improvisation. Sometimes it shouted too loudly. Sometimes it spoke at the wrong moment, and sometimes it just laughed maniacally like it was mocking the whole plan. After weeks of repeated practice, the final performance moment arrived. The woman walked into the room, and before she could figure out what was happening, the parrot suddenly spoke very clearly. "Say yes." She turned red, laughing and covering her mouth as he dropped to one knee behind her. Before she could even answer, the parrot shouted it again, louder than before, like it refused to accept any other outcome. She nodded yes. The parrot celebrated louder than everyone else combined. Story 30. A beachside electronic sign that almost triggered an alarm. Everything started with a very serious misunderstanding on the beach when a large electronic sign suddenly lit up in the middle of the night. From a distance, the flashing message looked exactly like an emergency signal. And as you might expect, no one assumed this was a proposal. Within minutes, authorities arrived looking extremely focused. Lights flashed, radios crackled, and the main character rushed to explain that no one was in danger, he was just about to propose. Once everything was cleared up, the tension faded. He stood in front of his girlfriend, hands shaking as the sign behind him switched to the message actually meant for her. This time there was no confusion. She laughed, nodded yes, and the siren sounded one last time, not as a warning, but as a slightly too loud congratulations from the people who had accidentally become part of the most important moment of his life. Story 31. 365 postcards in 1 year. For an entire year, she received one postcard every single day. No big gifts, no explanation, not a single day missed. Each card had just a few short lines, sometimes a memory, sometimes a dumb little joke, and that was just enough to make her smile. No one else knew about it. To friends, it looked like a slightly odd collecting habit. To her, the postcard slowly became part of daily life, like morning coffee or a goodnight text. On day 365, no postcard arrived. Instead, he showed up holding the entire stack. He spread them out on the floor, arranging them into one complete message. No kneeling, no noise, just one very quiet question. She nodded yes. And that is how it ended, because love does not need to be loud to be unforgettable. There was no crowd,
Are you happy?
no music, no audience, just
Are
two
you
people.
happy right now?
A question spoken softly enough for only one person to hear, and a small nod that was quiet but absolutely certain. It was not a moment that made the world stop, but it was the moment that made everything else stop mattering. After all the loud, risky, slightly unhinged proposals, this story leaves behind one very simple reminder. Love does not have to be flashy to be unforgettable. Sometimes the moments that stay with us the longest are the quiet ones, where two people realize they have chosen each other, and that is more than enough.